I'm not gonna lie. I think it looks bad to play. Like, I just don't even want to play that.
Because you think about it now, how cumbersome is it? It's almost impossible most times to pick up a deployable shield in a certain position and then maneuver it elsewhere. Now it's the easiest it's ever been.
In its purest form, you think about, grabbing a couple of mates on a Saturday night, playing in a cup or whatever. If that allows those people to do that, I think that's healthy for the game, rather than getting a couple of mates wanting to play ranked and then running into cheaters. Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to episode 25 of The Siege Show, presented by Jake and Guzz. It's been a little bit of a hot minute here as we're starting to wind down the off season, thankfully. And what do we have, of course, before the new stage starts back up? Well, we've got ourselves a whole new patch and a whole new reveal to get through. Lots to really talk about, as per usual, Guzz. But firstly, it's been a bit of a hot minute since, of course, we last put out an episode. We had EWC. Now we've got the new patch coming up very shortly, stage 2. It does feel like we're starting to now get into the swing of things again.
Yeah, it's been pretty busy. Obviously, we were over in Saudi, then I was in Japan. Quick turnaround for that. Finally back home, reveal comes out. The season dropping apparently midway through the esports calendar. I'm sure that will be a talking point at some point. But the season itself, honestly, really, really excited. I think the new operator Skopós looks really intriguing. Probably one of the most creative operators we have seen in quite some time. So excited for all of the changes. There's not really too many weak points, and yeah, look forward to discussing.
Yeah, I think it's a really good way. I mean, we'll touch further in depth on it more, but Skopós looks very, very intriguing in the sense that when you kind of think about how do we maybe bring someone into the game that is a little bit more diverse, a little bit different, a bit more unique. Unique's probably the right way to go about it. And it's like this creative mastermind, essentially, who's, wheelchair bound, but how can we get them into the map? Well, controlled robots. How awesome is that? So credit to the people who kind of came up with this idea and were able to implement it, and I think it plays very interesting as well. I think it's going to certainly be quite intriguing to see how it fits into everything, because it's obviously not something we're used to, right? When operators come out, I don't want to say they're a bit samey, but typically they kind of just fit in and mold very nicely. So let's kind of get into things, starting with Operation Twin Shells, going back a little bit to Operation New Blood, which for a lot of people, they weren't happy. But I think they weren't happy more so on first glance in what they felt like it was a vanilla patch that didn't get enough content. Is Ubisoft wanting to maybe dial back on how much they're putting into Rainbow Six? And they've basically come out and somewhat issued an apology to a degree. I mean, but essentially just sort of recommitting and saying, hey, no, we are putting more resources than ever into the game. I know for you and me, guys, we've been kind of saying publicly, like, no, they're not, dialing things back or anything. I know there's certainly been some concerned people, but, ultimately they are putting resources. This is their cash cow, and this is what they want to see as their main future product.
Yeah, again, I'm sure, as many would say, and even I would agree, words are one thing, actions are another. So assuming that they have, brought other things forward or reprioritized tasks or whatever the case may be, which is why maybe we had a bit of an off season, and then in future we'll reap the rewards of that. That's positive. I think this season, again, overall is a step in the right direction, and backs up the fact that they are putting more resources in certain areas of the game. And one of those areas is the anti-cheat. Again, like most of the recent seasons, another dedicated portion towards play protection. This one I think went for about 4 or 5 minutes, actually quite in depth and lengthy with this and the reputation system. But focusing in on anti-cheat itself, another statement again from the video, they now claim to have, and this is off the back of the August anti-cheat report as well, where they mentioned this as well, one of the largest in-house anti-cheat teams in the world for any given project. So it sounds like they have bolstered the anti-cheat and protection team at large, and it's now probably in line with other, first-person shooters of the same scale, like your Valorants, for instance, your Call of Duties, etc. Now, again, this isn't going to mean that overnight we have no cheaters. It's probably also not going to mean until a couple of seasons that we might see it reduce, if at all, but it is at least a step in the right direction that they're, not ignoring it, they're putting resources into it, and hopefully it then begins to improve.
Yeah, So, I mean, we don't probably want to sit on that for too long in terms of, looking at the past and what it means for the future. I know for us, it's certainly been something we've been very clear on. Like, this is going to be continued efforts from Ubisoft to make sure Rainbow Six is going to be viable for years to come. So, as you said, actions louder than words, but I think we're certainly going to be, getting those actions at least over the next, 12 to 24 months. I think you'll start to see a little bit of that ramp back up. Player protection, and when it comes to, cheating and discussions around that, I think it's always going to be paramount, always going to be there. 75% bans happening 12 hours sooner. More importantly, now Ubisoft claiming to have one of the largest in-house anti-cheat teams in the world for any given project, which is, a big statement to make in a world in which essentially I would say all online gaming developers have some kind of anti-cheat team. And your world of Riots, for example, I'd be curious to see, when you say one of the largest, is like, well, are you guys like behind Riot, for example? Probably, but like at least they're starting to really show it publicly, like, hey, we are really looking to combat this, and it is an issue. We're trying to do everything we possibly can. We've always said it as well on this podcast, and I feel like in some ways we repeat ourselves, but it's that arms race mentality. It really is from both sides, and I think artificial intelligence, AI, is going to play a big factor probably for both sides. And in the coming years, the hope for me would be Ubisoft find a way to just kind of stay marginally ahead, because it feels like maybe they're marginally behind at the moment. So can they just kind of flip that from being a little bit behind to them being a little bit ahead? And that's really all you can probably ask for, because you're never going to stamp it out entirely at all. So I still say it, I know I've said it plenty of times on this podcast, but the amount of times I go on TikTok and I see people cheating in Siege, but also in Valorant and CS, etc., and they're just so blatant about it. They're just so open about it, man. It is a little bit infuriating, but that's just the world we live in. People are far more open about cheating these days, and it's becoming more like accepted to do it, and because like everyone's doing it, so then you do it. Like, I don't know. I mean, cheating when I was a lot younger and the internet was far more newer, was like, if you cheated, it was like a big deal, and it was, not many people did it as much. Nowadays, it just feels like everyone and their dog is doing it. So hopefully Ubisoft can continue to, fight the good fight.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. Don't really have too much more to add. Again, I think that, personally speaking, this is probably the season I've played the least ranked of, maybe ever, simply because the cheating is really out of control, out of hand. So yeah, hopefully it improves. Moving forward, player comfort, couple of big updates. The first one after Action 2.0, probably don't need to touch on this too much, but essentially they have revamped the post-game screen, gives more value to skins, looks nicer, more modern, and on top of that, all the progress bars as well. I really appreciated this. Now all spin and go at the same rate together at the end of the match, so like the BP and the rank, etc., etc. You don't have to sort of sit there and skip through all these different animations, which is really nice. The bigger one though, and the one that I'm really intrigued by, is the drone boost mechanic. So you get 3 boosts of 3 seconds each now on attacking drones. This also includes clutch drones for Brava and shock drones for Twitch, and essentially allow you to navigate the map faster on attack. Attack obviously continues to be quite weak in Siege, and I think that by bolstering aspects of the game like this and further encouraging people to just simply use drones and info gather is a really good step in the right direction. I don't know necessarily how this is going to translate between PC and console, right? Because you think about PC, it's far easier to track drones naturally anyway compared to console. So I don't know if there's going to have to be concessions and maybe some numbers adjusted to make it a little bit fairer, because on control it's going to be really hard to track drones, but I certainly think it is a good change.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's intriguing. It's always a way to kind of keep the game fresh and keep it, active, and trying to tweak little things here and there, buy new elements. I actually kind of noticed, I don't know if it was EWC Stage 1, maybe a combination of both, but the drone economy felt like, or at least over the last 6 months, it's probably been the hardest for players and teams to actually keep it at a pretty good rate. I mean, I feel like when I got into Siege, the drone economy, it felt far more common to see teams with like 4+, 5+ towards the end of rounds. Nowadays, it's like 1, 2, if any. More often than not, you're really struggling. So we'll see if that does either help things a little bit, and gives also Ubisoft more tools in future. Maybe you bring out certain operators that can, lay down traps or something where they backfires on the boost. So they go to boost and then it just blows up the drone or something, some kind of trap. I don't know. Moving on, Siege Cup beta, and Siege Cup being I think a really good boon for Rainbow Six, for Ubisoft. So as they start to kind of, roll this out, I do like the way that they talk about it when they essentially say in the video, like they put it above ranked, right? Like for them, this is the premier mode when it comes to Rainbow Six Siege. Now, you want to play as competitively as possible within the game. You got to go play Siege Cup. You got to go and get 4 other people, and you've got to compete here. You get competitive coins. And yeah, I mean, I like the fact that obviously banned players lose access, etc. That's just a given at that kind of level, right? But either way, I think it really goes to show this is not just kind of put in the corner, because you can release something like a Siege Cup and just kind of put it in the corner and still promote things like ranked above it. But if you're actually going to promote Siege Cup and say, here's how we want you to go. We want you to go quick play into standard, into ranked, into Siege Cup. I mean, that's better for the longevity and growth of the game if you're actually going to be putting it at the top of the pedestal. Now it's all about, though, how do you get people to actually play it? How do you actually get people to, find a group? Because a lot of people play ranked solo or duo, etc. It's a big step to go and find, a committed group of 5 people to essentially play a tournament. So that's going to be where the incentives matter. How do you help them find groups? All of those things, and what that retroactively does, I think, is helps rebuild the grassroots. Because when you have grassroots is when you have grassroots communities who are basically set up to help you find other people to then play in these kind of tournaments. So I really hope that while you can certainly look at this as like helping achieve towards, the esports landscape, I look at it as grassroots. I look at it as like maybe rebuilding those Discord communities. People can go on, as a solo or duo, you're grinding ranked and I want to play Siege Cup. Where do I go to find people? I go to this Discord, I find this community, yada, yada, yada. And I hope that's the future for something like Siege Cup, more so than just looking at it as like a feeding ground for, Pro League, for example, because there's other ways to get into Pro League.
Yeah, I was really quite impressed at the presentation. I am obviously disappointed that the beta one is PC exclusive, but they give a very good reasoning behind that they can be much more dynamic in their change and fast pace compared to console, where they always have to wait for approvals. It is, though, just locked into NA-EU, if I'm correct. So like Brazil, APAC don't get access. That's frustrating, but again, they're trying to contain the environment and try to get it set for Season 4. So provided it works well Season 4, I'm not too upset. Competitive coins, I think, is a good incentive. I think it also plugs into ranked as well, but they'll probably scale more in Siege Cup, so players are incentivized to play it, get items from the collection. As mentioned, banned players lose access, but more importantly, even more so over that, is the fact that if you play with somebody that gets banned, then you have your access to Siege Cup revoked as well. I think that's a really, really, really good measure that will discourage people from playing with cheaters, and if they do, well, then they're fucked. So they can get GG'd, which is good. And yeah, talking about like the grassroots point, depending on how the launch goes and how well received it is, it could sort of usher in that era again where it was like, I don't know, like 2017, 2018, 2019, where like the ESL Cups were quite popular. They sort of dipped in popularity and have struggled to resurge since. Now that it's in-client, in-game, multi-platforms, you think about Season 4 as well with cross-platform. I don't know if that'll be integrated for Cup, but that should really grow that community. And while the end goal doesn't necessarily have to be for it to plug into esports, depending on how it's implemented, it could be in a similar vein to like a Valorant, right? If you have like a leaderboard system or a qual system or whatever, these could, and in my opinion probably should, depending on how it's formatted, replace open qualifiers and have like a year-long qualifier-esque format where you play in Siege Cup to earn points towards a leaderboard to earn a position in a qualifier for the main circuit or something to that extent. I think it can be done. Obviously it's quite complex in practice, but in theory this platform has a lot of potential if it's done right and also maintained properly as well.
Absolutely. I think that's sort of like end goal territory. When you kind of think about Siege Cup and you think about the way that you can sort of implement this, it doesn't necessarily have to be just sort of one event. You can run multiple events simultaneously. You can have your more standardized, Cup, and then alongside it, you could have Pro League qualifiers, for example. Having it all within the game, simplifies things a little bit. As long as it can be managed properly in the terms of tournament operation aspects, rather than, you can't have it all just kind of self-automated when it comes to like Pro League quals, because you be able to watch the players, get, MOS checks, things like that. There's always going to be external conflicts that you've got to sort of sort out. So if you can kind of use it as a client to run the tournament, but you still have like tournament operations that are kind of handling everything, then that's fine.
I mean, think about it
I'd
like
almost
this.
use it as like a sign-up tool as well.
Yeah, like I'm envisioning sort of a system where, whether it be for like a stage qualifier for the main leagues or even like 6 invitational open quals, where there's like X period of months where players compete, whether weekly or bi-weekly, they earn points towards a regional leaderboard, and then X amount of teams from that leaderboard get automatically into like the closed qualifier portion, or they get some kind of advantage in the open qualifier portion where it is then more regulated. Obviously, you have to be super careful that you're not giving teams like a massive advantage, certainly no free passes, because it's difficult to monitor and manage, and cheaters and fucking no MOS checks, etc., etc., etc. But it would be nice for there to be some, interplay between Siege Cup and the esports scene, and I'm sure that's something that is being considered. I don't know for sure. I'm not sitting here like withholding information. I literally have no idea, but that would be my hope at least.
Yeah, and look, at the end of the day, as well as we kind of wrap up when it comes to Siege Cup, 1, it's in beta, and 2, it's really difficult to kind of pin the hopes of an entire esport on just one mode, a mode that isn't out, despite the esport already flourishing before it. So I look at Siege Cup as an addition. It doesn't have to be this like savior. It's not going to change the landscape of Siege esports. I think, again, I look at it more grassroots. I look at more entry point. And from there, you can then maybe find a way to integrate, things like Pro League and Open Quals and SI Quals and things like that, as you mentioned, and have that maybe be the end point of something like a Siege Cup. So I think there's a good future there, as long as it all gets implemented well. Hopefully the beta goes well, and I am definitely keen to see how it does progress. And I think in its purest form, you think about, grabbing a couple of mates on a Saturday night, playing in a cup or whatever, if that allows those people to do that, I think that's healthy for the game, rather than getting a couple of mates wanting to play ranked and then running into cheaters. I'm sure there'll be some cheaters in the cup. There's not much you can do, but
yeah, I mean, as long as
it's a bit better.
Again, as long as there's strict restrictions, I'd even advocate for there to be more stringent restrictions on cup compared to ranked, especially if they're elevating it as a bigger game mode. Once like the rep system's done, I'd say you'd have to be at least in the upper half of reputation and like a minimum level 100 or something to that effect. I don't want ranked to necessarily be kept to that extent, but I think cup should be. And again, strict bans, you ban, you're gone, your teammates are gone, and eventually it should sort itself out.
I also, just to add on to that, I think reports in Siege Cup should also be like higher priority or something, or like be able to be followed up a lot better. I was like watching a TikTok streamer the other day, and someone asked in the question in the comments and was like, "Don't you get reported?" And the guy was just like, "No, it doesn't do anything." Like, it just doesn't do anything. So like, hopefully, if you have something that's like a Siege Cup, if you do get reported in Siege Cup, it's like, okay, well, let's go and have a look at this. Yeah, we'll see. Either way, moving forward to the balancing portion of the update, which is always the most controversial, typically. Most fun in my eyes, and the controversy begins quick and sharp. So, firstly, not that many changes. Only 3 operators actually, and not including technically the new operators, a 4th, but Solus, Dockerby, and Nook. I can't say Nook was like on my radar, but I'm not like sitting here like overly shocked. Solus, though, when I saw Solus, I was like, oh, okay, maybe they're going to be reverting a few things. Maybe they were like, this is too much. So from what I've watched of it is now gadgets are unidentified, and you use this overclock charge that emits a warning and then identifies the gadget. I'm not gonna lie. I think it looks shit. I think it looks bad to play. Like, I just don't even want to play that. The quality of life for Solus has actually gone backwards, in my opinion. And I think that while you could make certain arguments that it's like different enough that it could work, I just think it looks worse. I think it looks like a nerf, and I think it's already an operator we barely see anyway. And it probably didn't need this change, to be honest.
Yeah, Solus is in a really weird state. They mentioned in the video that it's had lower pick rate of presence, which is understandable after the part 1 of this nerf. However, the win rate was steady. So I'm presuming that the next part of this is to try and increase the skill gap or skill ceiling of the operator by having the overclock charge, by now only identifying in the center of the screen. They're trying to make it a much more specific role and to increase the risk reward element with the warning emission. So I think it's okay. However, as I sort of theorized, and I thought they proposed in like one of the recent designer notes, they sort of phrased it that this part 2 is going to bring her more in line, when in fact it probably pushes her further out of line and makes her less desirable to play. The gadget now does last longer. They didn't specify how long, and so that may bring her into a world in which she's good in the right hands in specific situations, but she's gone are the days of her being the Swiss Army knife, which is a good thing because that was also on the other extremity of being just too versatile and too overpowered. Now they may be a little bit too tunnel visioned, so I don't know. But again, it's going to be an instance where they're going to have to sit on this for probably another 6 months before they make any changes, before they can, review the data. So I'm not a huge fan of the Souls changes. What would I have done, though? It's tough. I guess the biggest question is, are the gadgets immediately being identified and the warning not being emitted? Is that good or bad for the game? Obviously good for Solus, but I think that's a tougher question than some people are probably making it out to be. I think there's fair arguments for both systems.
Yeah, I think Solus in their current state is like, you're either going to be too strong or too weak, right? Can you find that middle ground with the current setup? I'm not too sure. Maybe at ranked is fine, but at pro level, I feel like it's just pretty much non-existent now, outside of certain scarce cases. But yeah, in terms of this particular change, I don't think it's. If anything, it just widens the gap. It just probably widens the gap in some areas. I think those who are good with it and are going to be wanting to continue with it will probably be fine. And those that maybe were like on the edge of still maintaining usage of Solus will now be like, it's not worth it now. Now I just don't really want to play her. Moving on to Dockerby, and I actually kind of like this change. I don't know about you guys. I'll get your thoughts on it very shortly. But now when it comes to the Logic Bomb, you start with no charges at the beginning of the round, and you will get one every 45 seconds to your 2 total. So in terms of the total usage, nothing changes. The only change is the fact that you just can't spam them at the start, which will certainly alleviate any, abilities to play on a rush game with the Dockerby Logic Bombs. I think there's a good change to some degree. I think, 45 seconds for your first one, you could sync up for a team push off of that if you want to go, early enough. But otherwise, I think this is going to mean your usage of those Logic Bombs can't just be kind of spammed early to allow and facilitate entry. You're going to have to be able to find better uses for this, in the middle portion of the round.
Yeah, so I did tweet about this at GuzzCast. Go follow me. Obviously, I'm limited by characters there, so it's not as in-depth as I'll probably talk about here. But essentially, I said Dockerby is really good at the opening and execute phase of the round. You can facilitate the low entry early round, and you can obfuscate. I hate saying that word, obfuscate. Defender denial info at the end. You can cover defender denial info at the end of rounds, cameras, etc. New changes help address the early round, but the late round still needs attention. And then I theorized perhaps a shorter call duration could help encourage and reward a tighter execute window. And that's sort of where I stand at the moment. I think the changes are fine. They don't go far enough. 45 seconds, I would argue as well, is maybe a little bit too early. There's plenty of maps where realistically you're only setting up for an entry at about 30 to 45 seconds into the round anyway. So that could get pushed back to a minute if they're trying to alleviate pressure in the early round, but that's a number that they can tinker around with. I do like the idea of operators in general being rewarded for staying alive later in the round. That's always a good mark of an operator design in my book, so I think that's great. However, it doesn't change any of the late round factors, especially for highly skilled teams with decent synchronization, you can get a lot done in one call late round, and it's very difficult, if not impossible sometimes, for the defense to respond because they're completely in the dark. So too are the players that are dead because they can't check the cameras either. So again, I don't know how you really alleviate that. I think maybe a shorter call time is probably the easiest way to go about that without getting too complex. And I think that would probably put us in a good position, reduce the call time by like 25% and see what kind of impact that has. There was also some discussion. I don't know if I've talked about it on the pod, but I've definitely talked about it in private. Could there be a more interesting gameplay element to Dokkaebi if, say, you get that first call after 45 seconds or whatever that period is determined to be, but to get a second call, you do have to hack a defender's camera, much like you can defend to get access to the cameras. Do you have to execute a hack to get that second call? And then it introduces another layer of risk and reward, both for the attack, wanting to commit to maybe hunting down a roamer to get that camera, and then obviously for the side of defense, how risky do you want to get on the roam, knowing that you put the rest of the team under a lot of pressure if you die.
Yep. Yeah. I mean, I think you make up some really, really valid, points as to maybe what you can do to tweak Dokkaebi. I'm curious to see what this change is going to do for her, and I think it, in some ways, might alleviate some of her oppression that she can certainly bring in the early portions of rounds. I think she'll still be a very strong operator, though, and I don't think this will change too much in the hands of, say, pro players or even high-end and ranked. I think, again, it just kind of changes where and when the logic bombs get used, not so much the length of them and the actual fact that they do get used. It does put emphasis, though, on not dying early if you're Dokkaebi, right? So if you can get an early pick onto a Dock, then that's great. Onto the Nook now, who has had a almost like mini rework to some degree with the consumption of the energy on the cloak. So now only consumes when sprinting and shooting, which does mean if you're kind of just sitting still, you are, an invisible flank watch. Not actually invisible, but you get the point. And the FMG9 buffed as well. I mean, it's intriguing because it's almost like a human flank watch drone if you want to play the Nook, such as, get into location, then sit location, kind of gameplay, kind of game style, somewhat wanting to move. I think Ubisoft are somewhat wanting to move away from Nook being, kind of cloak up and move around the map and be hard to detect. So that, for me, is a nerf, right? That kind of gameplay, that kind of game style is probably a nerf, but, you do get a different option now, which in some cases might be better.
Yeah, I actually really like this change. As small and minute as it sort of seems on the surface, I think, as you are alluding to, dramatically changes the role that Nook plays. Now, to preface, I'm also somebody that hates the idea of Nook being reworked, and, as years ago they tried it or it didn't go through or whatever, in being able to essentially walk through traps. I think that is terrible game design and would be incredibly frustrating to play against and would not be fun to play. So I'm glad they have completely gone the opposite of that route, essentially, and now position Nook as a mobile turret, mobile flank watch, FMG buffed, especially now with magnified scopes as well, as mentioned in the video, can now be an operator that lurks into the map, sits in position, lets teammates flush out roamers or anybody off site into the Nook, and you should be able to farm kills. I genuinely think this is a really, really good change. I'm excited to see how it plays out. I think it rewards smart siege and coordination, and again, is a much better solution to some of the other reworked ideas. So,
yeah, I guess mixed results when it comes to the balancing regarding, Solus, Dokkaebi, and Nook. I'm happy to give Nook a bit of a tick there and a bit of a thumbs up. Dokkaebi, I'm maybe a little bit more optimistic than potentially yourself, and Solus, I think we'll both agree, is maybe missed the mark there. I am curious to see what people say. I mean, if you're watching now, and I would love to get your thoughts in the comments down below, but especially when it comes to the three operators and their changes. Solus, are you a fan of that? I'm personally not, and I think maybe the general consensus from the community is similar to that. And then Dokkaebi, I mean, maybe indifferent, closer to that, and then Nook I'm pretty content with. It does change the operator a little bit, but I'm curious to see what people will do with it. I'm very curious to see, especially maybe at Pro League, if that's going to be something that's going to be utilized moving forward, because that's it for balancing. That was the only 3 operators that got any changes. New operator coming in, and I hope I'm saying this right. It's going to be another one where it's like...
It's one of those names. It's a bit, yeah.
Skopós. It's always worse as well with the Australian accent. I feel like
our accent is a debuff for some of these more exotic names.
Exactly.
Skopós,
Either
mate.
way, so a very fascinating operator, essentially remote controlling Talos and Colossus, the 2 robots, shells. I mean, I think they were referred to both. And it's an intriguing design where you control one and you play like a normal, operator. And the other one is essentially stationary, like a sentry with as a shield that you could also, kind of have a little peek, use it as a camera, get information, almost like a bulletproof camera shield combo. That you can switch to and then operate and play. It's a very intriguing design. I love it. I think it's very similar to like Spectre Divide, for those a bit unfamiliar. New game being designed, created by Shroud's gaming studio. I'm not too sure exactly of the specifics, but I would imagine this operator and its design well and truly has been in the works for like well over a year. So I don't think there's any kind of case of like, oh my God, Spectre Divide came out and now look at this. They didn't make this operator in the last couple of months. Like, let's be honest. But it doesn't play exactly the same. For reference, for those that maybe are a bit unfamiliar with what I'm talking about, Spectre Divide is essentially you play as 2 characters. If you die on one character, you actually then get to play again as that second character as a shooter. So this is not quite the same, guys. If you die on your active robot, you're done for the round. So it's not like 2 lives. Of course, if your inactive shell loses its life, I guess, its inactive shell, the one that you're active in stays alive, but you no longer have your shell. So there are some nuances to it, but for the most part, I think it's a very intriguing, well-designed operator. The question is, will it see play? Because on the surface level, it looks intriguing, unique. It looks like you can do some things. When you kind of dig a bit deeper, like how much is there to it? Because I was watching the reveal and they used an example of playing off of the camera mode, right? Where you kind of use it like a bulletproof camera. And they made it seem like this was like a new thing where it's like, well, you could just put that bulletproof camera behind a shield and it's the exact same thing. Where's the difference? And then you have really like no other utility that you're actually bringing to the game. So do you feel as if there's enough there that Skopós can actually be playable at the high level?
Yeah, that's a really tough question. I feel like generally speaking, when an operator is revealed, I'll have an okay radar as to where they sort of sit and if they're going to be competitively viable, how they're going to play in ranked. Is the casual community going to enjoy this operator? And I think in terms of, well, firstly, casual enjoyment, I think is a big tick. I think it's a very unique operator. It introduces a lot of interesting gameplay opportunities, has some very unique attributes as well, which we'll talk about at some point too. But as for ranked and then further on that line of thinking, competitive, is it going to be viable? First and foremost, it's really hard to tell. Is it going to be good? Certainly don't know at this point. The way I sort of see this operator playing out is as a deployable shield that can be easily rotated in response to attacking pivots. So this sort of operator, in my eyes, will really favor teams that are willing and able to play really dynamically on defense and are super willing to completely switch up, their setup or orientation mid-round in response to what the attack is doing and sort of fortify that front line. Because you think about it now, how cumbersome is it? It's almost impossible most times to pick up a deployable shield in a certain position and then maneuver it elsewhere. Now it's the easiest it's ever been. How viable is that going to be? It's hard to tell. There's some really good counters that were shown in the video, right? Like Dockerby, who I don't think is going to be nerfed off the face of the planet, still going to be strong. Flores can blow it up, so that's going to be tricky to counter if you're not bringing other complementary utility. So I think it's going to be an operator that excels in specific situations for teams that are willing to lean into that playstyle, but it could also hinder teams if they select it and they don't have a particularly good vision on how they want to actually play around it, because I think you might find that some teams and players get like too caught up and then the complexity of the operator, and potentially could have played something else more useful in that position to hold a particular part of the map. So I'm excited. I think we are going to see it. However, it's definitely not going to be a staple pick. I'd be pretty surprised if it is.
Yeah, I agree with a lot of that sentiment. When I kind of look at the operator, it seems like one of the most fun operators to play if you're a solo and ranked.
Yeah.
Right. I think that's the consensus I get immediately. I think you might see the odd Pro League player who's maybe a little bit more selfish could pull it out, could use it. But whenever we get these, though, it's always about like, what can people cook up with it? If you can find out certain strategies, and I always say this, and it's a very easy trope, but there might be a particular map with a particular site in which it has a use. And there's nothing wrong with that. I mean, I think that when we got Striker and Sentry, I was the first one. I was like, hey, let people cook with this. You know, in terms of the gadget selection choices, there might be particular times in which you want to bring a certain combination that maybe other operators can't bring. And we saw that. We saw that. So, you know, very recently, EWC, for example. So I think that when it comes to Skopós, I'm not writing it off. I'm not like, okay, this is trash. It's not going to see Pro League play. But I just feel as if it's a bit more of a rank operator, you know, in ranked, in solo play, in quick play. You have a bit of fun. It's going to be almost your go-to, you know, on defense and be like, okay, I want to pick this because I feel like I can maybe frag out, I can switch up, I can get information, all these things. But when it comes to coordinated team play at the highest level, I don't know if it does enough. In certain areas, it might. It's got some intriguing little RPG elements too, which is very interesting. Can't be knocked, can't wear armor, immune to smoke, Fenrir. Very intriguing, I guess, because, you know, robots aren't going to get affected by these things. But
lore accurate.
Yeah, I mean,
look,
accurate,
I'm the first
sure.
person to say that I don't really care about the lore, and I don't think lore should take precedent over gameplay elements. You know, good example being like Zofia Self-Raise. That was a stupid ability, and I'm glad it's gone. But in this context, it actually sort of makes sense, right? Having two bodies not being able to be knocked makes sense for balancing. Again, same applies to armor, and then Smoke Fenrir I think is just a unique sort of gameplay opportunity that again makes sense for the character, and I don't think is too broken. So again, it might lean into the Skopós actually being played relatively aggressive, with the secondary fallback being the deployable shield on site that you can maneuver around and maybe get value from that simultaneously. I don't know. It's so difficult to say. It's going to be, I think, very site and play dependent.
There is one element that I look at it as well is there are a couple of ways you can kind of play it, right? I mean, I know in the reveal video, they kind of used it as like, use the shell to get information, then play off it. You know, again, that kind of bulletproof camera plus deployable shield combination and playing off of that. I look at it as like, you leave the shell on site and then you go roam and you get a kill and then you go into a corner and you transfer and then you just go back and play site. And if your shell dies, your shell dies. Who cares at that point? So you can kind of use that as a way to teleport back to site if you don't care about your shell that you leave behind.
Yeah.
So there are ways that you can kind of use it, be aggressive, get a kill. You know, when you think about Siege as well, you know, defenders going for spawn peaks and those kind of aggressive plays and wanting to, you know, get a pick early. You know, not in the pool anymore, but, you know, Oregon basement, you leave one shell down below and then you roam up, you know, kids' dorms, for example, get a kill and then quickly switch back down to basement. Is that not like actually something that would be viable? So yeah, let people cook. I'm very curious to see what the future for Skopós is going to be. I love the design. I think it's very unique. And hopefully we can continue to go into a direction where, you know, Siege is not just a case of bringing in, you know, basic level operators where it's like freeze this, install this, and electrify that, and smoke this. And I think this is really unique. This is really cool. Very different. So I think that, you know, really does go to show that the developers are doing some really good work behind the scenes. Moving to the esports section, there's not a lot to it because, of course, we haven't begun for stage 2 just yet, but we did have the Esports World Cup, if we want to talk about that. And then also South Asia qualifiers, an intriguing topic as well, considering that's just wrapped up and the I guess the conversation around it very quickly, I guess with EWC Guzz, we won't probably spend too long on this, but BDS winning that one out 3-0 over W7M feels like a lifetime ago when we put out the preview and kind of lived up to expectations, right? We thought BDS would win it. They did. I said at the time, I felt like Brazil was, I can't remember if you did as well. If you did, but I felt like Brazil was going to bounce back at this tournament. They did. At one point, it almost looked like they were going to have all 4 of their teams in the semifinals. I felt like, Dark Zero would, again, be a factor towards, the playoffs. They could have easily made a semifinal. They didn't. Bliss, disappointing. Probably fair to say. I felt like losing 2-0 to Space Station and 7-3, 7-4, probably not good enough for Bliss. They need to be doing a little bit better than that. I think for Bleed to make playoffs, that's good. Ultimately, though, they were not even a contest for W7M. So for APAC, not the best event, but you still got Bleed into a playoff position. Bliss had a chance, certainly squandered it. But for me, ultimately the return of Brazil. And then you've got like BDS who have reigned supreme in the desert again for the 3rd time in a row.
Yeah, that was easily the the worst grand final I've seen in quite some time, and definitely the worst one I've ever casted. It was just so one-sided. There was not a single point at all throughout that entire match where we could coherently make an argument that W7M were going to fight their way back. So potentially a little bit disappointing for Furia maybe to have not met BDS in the final. Obviously played them back in semis, still lost 2-0, so probably would have been a similar tale, but I still feel like Furia would have had a little bit more fight in them, obviously with the amount of experience that they have, including best of 5s as well. So yeah, it is what it is. Overall, a little bit of a disappointing tournament in terms of competitiveness. However, BDS keep that streak going in Saudi. So
yeah, we didn't even get to cast that much actually, which was really the most disappointing aspect. We weren't aware, of course, as to how much we would be, effectively covering. We found out that the day 1 crew, Gibson and Whippet, were able to cover like the vast majority of games within 1 day with a B and a C stream. And then we had 4 days of, important matches. So, look, overall, good event. But by any means, it's not one that's going to be looked back on and be like, oh, wow, this match or this game or these highlights or anything like that. I think you said it best. Like in terms of competitiveness, like it just really didn't have it, which is a shame because, the good elements that actually get lost in these kind of events is the boot camp element. For a lot of these teams, when you kind of look towards APAC especially, right? So you had, and LATAM, Team Cruelty, Bleed, Talon, Scars, Bliss, GK, over from MENA as well. All of those teams, respectively, get to essentially get high profile scrims. By the way, the players in the team stayed all the way until the end. So they all left after the grand final. So even if they got knocked out day 1 or day 2 or whatever, they were still practicing, scrimming, boot camping. So while maybe the event itself didn't go too well for those teams respectively, they get a huge bonus going into stage 2. They just had essentially a free boot camp. I'm looking at your Blisses, your Bleeds, etc. Free boot camp, played all the top teams. They were able to also play teams in Europe. I think the ping was about 90 to 100. Not ideal, but still something to consider. So for those teams, respectively, going back now to Asia and to OS and to Korea and to Japan, huge bonus going into stage 2, which is not too far away, just a couple of weeks now. And I'm curious to see if that will reflect. For BDS, I think they certainly go into the next major, in my mind, as the absolute dead set favorite. But they also need to win outside of Saudi. They need to win outside of the desert. They couldn't do it. They couldn't do it in Manchester. We'll see if they can do it in Montreal. That's going to be very intriguing. If they get there, I mean, you never know when it comes to EUL. So, but in terms of the competitiveness of the event, not really much to remember there. South Asia qualifiers are now drawing our attention to stage 2. From this point onwards, it's all about stage 2. It's all about the pathway to Montreal, to Canada. And it starts with South Asia, guys. And for all of the controversy when it comes to esports in Siege. Lumina, tier 2 EU players thinking they could just waltz on over to not just Asia, but to South Asia. They were like, you know what? No, I've seen those knock guys. I've seen Hasib Warriors. We can take those guys down. I'm sure the amount of shit talking from tier 2, even probably tier 3 in EU, and even maybe NA. They're like, oh my God, these guys suck. They get to go play in Pro League. We'll just go over there. And they did. Where did they go, guys? I think they went to India.
Yeah, they went to India. And
they went to India. And what happened to them?
I just gotta compose myself. You've prefaced this so well. They thought they could go to what is objectively the worst region in the world and qualify for Pro League, which probably wasn't that far-fetched of a prediction. They lost the upper bracket final to Hasib Warriors 2-1. They get knocked down to the lower bracket final, lose that 0-2, and just as the cherry on top, the second map of that lower bracket final, they lost 7-1. They got a single defensive round on club to pack their bags and go back to EU.
I just want to confirm, by the way, if you don't know the answer, that's fine, but they can't play EU, right?
They cannot play EU quals now, no.
Yeah.
In fact, I actually saw a tweet from one of the Lumina players. Can't remember who it specifically was, but essentially saying they're like a free agent now for South Asia, and then in the politest way possible. I don't know if anyone would want to pick you up after you lost back-to-back games in the South Asia calls. Maybe one of the South Asian teams will. I don't know, potentially.
Yeah.
But yeah.
So looking a little bit deeper into it, right? So they played qualifier 2. For South Asia Open qualifiers, which was with Northstar, Dead Eye. They played Northstar, beat them 7-1, and then they got to go in and play the qualifiers. They actually beat Knock Guts. They beat them 2-1 in the upper bracket semifinals. And they actually beat them 7-5 on Clubhouse, which is the map they ultimately lost 7-1.
Oh no.
So maybe Knock was sandbagging and didn't want to give strats away. Lumina, of course, and ended up now also losing, said upper bracket final. Now, after winning the first map, they lost it 8-7. So they could have just 2-0'd and they'd be in. And then they lost the third map 8-6. Like, they couldn't have been in a better position to qualify, piss a lot of people off, and they couldn't get the job done. Absolutely bottled it.
They got gatekept by South Asia. And as I said in my tweet, that is literally the crowning achievement of South Asia. They haven't achieved anything remotely close to this before. You could even make the argument this is the most success that they've had, quote unquote, internationally.
So look, at the end of the day, it really does go to show for, tier 2, tier 3 especially, but tier 2, EU, you're good. You're probably at the South Asia level, apparently, because, it's not like that you were that far behind them. You beat Knock 2-1. You lost to Hasib 2-1, and then you lost 2-0, not Unite that night, but I think for those guys, I think it's more of a reality check. Like, hey, not only are we not close to EU because we're in tier 2, but also we are South Asia level. So, and South Asia is probably the entry point when it comes to Pro League. I love the Hasib Warriors. I love Knock. I always try and give them a bit of a boost up when it comes to the Asia League. But evidently, whenever they do play those from Southeast Asia, they get absolutely smashed. Smashed, like decimated.
Spanked and smashed. Yeah,
it is usually very hard to view. I'm curious, Asia League coming up stage 2, if they can get something this particular stage. If memory serves me correct, in any kind of like progression or qual game in a playoff, I still don't think they've actually won a series against the Southeast Asian teams. Something like who was it? Was it Daystar? Like one of them beat Daystar or something, but we don't claim those as Southeast Asia anyway, do we?
Yeah, I don't know. Potentially. I can't remember my full Asia lore, but look, I'm just happy they gatekept. I mean, I think we may have talked about this a little bit briefly prior, and we might do it more in the exclusive content, but I really am not a fan of this even being permissible. I don't know what rules need to be in place to prevent it, but having a full EU team just literally come over to India for however X amount of weeks or however long it would have been, and then being eligible to qual makes a whole mockery of the regional system. So
yeah, what's to stop Fnatic from flying over to Australia for a stage?
probably their share program agreement, but you are right.
Yeah.
Outside of those examples, like, yeah,
you're right. You got me there. Yeah, I mean, I more so is just taking the piss in terms of like what's to stop a, perennial tier 1 EU team that maybe doesn't have any kind of agreement, or, for example, from just mustering up the cash for one stage, go to OS, beat X Team Bliss, which I guess we can talk about to some degree, as of course that has been a change up. But yeah, I mean, it is a very intriguing notion, and I'm not a fan of it either. They did technically, though, fly all the way to India. It's not like they played from home. So there is a little bit of like marginal, like, okay, at least you kind of did it the right way. But like, it still should, like, I think what they did is fine. It just shouldn't be allowed, if that makes sense. Like within the current permissible rules, they didn't do anything wrong.
Yeah, no.
I think the rules should be changed so that you can't just like fly over for a stage. Either needing certain residency, or even just sort of being able to say you've been in the country for a year. Something like that. Just to stop the whole like fly over to a region for a stage, qual, and then fly back. That shit's got to stop. Yeah, and spoke about Asia. Of course, it is confirmed now, the 8 teams, no real change-ups, to be honest. 4 of them being invited anyway, Fury, Elevate, Direwolves, and Bleed Esports. The 2 qualifiers for each of the regions, South Asia, Southeast Asia, Hasib Knock Knock, no surprise. And then No Cap and Rival Esports, a newcomer to a degree when it comes to the organization, but names that we're familiar with. Scarlet, Songla, Jackie Wu, for example. So a new org, which is cool. From Taiwan, but it is, of course, familiar names. So I don't think we're going to see too many change-ups when it comes to Asia League for Stage 2. But as always, a bloodbath of a region, considering they only have 1 spot, and Bleed have been, utterly dominant. So for your Furies, your Direwolves, your Elevates, there's a bit of catching up to do for, a region where Bleed have also just come back from EWC, bit of a boot camp. We'll see what changes are going to get made up. But very quickly, when it comes to Oceania, we're not too far away either. I think they're still going through qualifiers, as has been made public as well. Team Bliss and the boys have, both parted ways. So I'm very curious to see who's going to pick up the X-Bliss roster, what that's going to look like, when I don't think it's been announced. I don't think anything's been announced. So I got no idea. If that's even going to be for this stage. I really hope it is going to be for this stage, because I would hate nothing more to see them running around with some kind of like shitty orgless name, which is always crap to watch, especially for a team as good as they are. So yeah, hopefully that does get sorted. But qualifiers for OS happening, and of course for the rest of APAC and around the world, guzzes. Esports is starting to kick back up not too long from this video going out to Stage 2 beginning.
Yeah, I'm sure next week we'll probably try and do a more full scale preview for the stage. Talk about.
Well, I think once the quals are done, we can do a full blown preview.
Now there was some conjecture as to whether or not X Team Bliss would have to re-qual. I'm led to believe that they have got the spot. They are invited. However, I don't think that's one. I don't know from an official source. That's kind of just what I've heard on the grapevine. So we'll wait and see if that's the case. They should be invited. But I guess there's obviously some kind of ruling behind that, because Team Bliss have the license and what that means, etc. Whether or not the players retain that or what happens. So I guess we'll wait and see. Could be a very intriguing qualifier if they have to make that run, but we'll wait and see.
All right. Well, as I just said, once the qualifiers have concluded, we can come back again. We can, go through basically all of the regions, do our standardized preview, and put out another episode. So as we kind of wind down here for episode 25, thank you so much again for everyone, following on. Leave your comments down below. I really want to see what your thoughts are in terms of the balancing changes when it comes to also the upcoming Stage 2. There's a lot that's going to be happening. Of course, we'll be out with a new episode soon with the preview for Stage 2, and then episodes throughout the stage as well, as we continue to cover the regions and get back into the swing of things when it comes to esports on the pathway to Montreal. As always, of course, Patreon up above. We're about to go do some exclusive content, talking a little bit more in depth on certain topics like Lumina, potentially even Skopós, etc., and maybe even some other more controversial topics that we'll get into there. As always, we've got our lovely Discord community where we are very active. Thank you very much for everyone watching. We'll see you in episode 26.